So now we're going to move into phase 2 of our project now, which is looking at building massing. How do you modify building massing? How do you take information that you've begun to develop and then modify it even further into architectural systems? So you're well aware on the Rhino side of how to do Boolean functions at this point, correct? Okay. Well, I'll go over them in Rhino, sort of on the side, as we're introducing them in Grasshopper as well. Okay, so that you understand them fully. But they're going to play kind of a very important role because you can use them parametrically directly within Grasshopper, which is pretty awesome, and it'll help you chop up geometry. But our first exploration along this path is actually generating brand new massing geometry directly in Grasshopper. And then from that, we're going to start referencing information in and deconstructing it and modifying it and all that good stuff. So the first step here is, to make it interesting, we're going to create a tower. And this tower is going to have, a sort of warped curve geometrical form, right? So I'm going to put a couple of points down. I'll just put, say 4 points or so, kind of put them in a triangle and then put one sort of in the middle-ish. So start off with something kind of like this.
It's just 4.
Yeah, 4 points. You could do more, but I'm just starting with 4. And then I'm going to reference those in by doing set multiple points. And you can just select them all and hit enter. And then from there, I'm going to borrow some of the operative methodology of what we did in the surface patterning again, and I'm going to do a curve that maps around all 3 of these points. Okay, so if you go into curve, and then the panel spline, and you do a NURBS curve, it's going to ask you for vertices, and the degree is how accurate to the curve it's going to be, and then whether or not it's a periodic curve, meaning will it attempt to make a full connection? Will it close on itself? So I plug in the vertices, and this is what it's going to first try and do. And you're familiar with that curve. And then under param input, and you do a Boolean toggle. We've seen this before. Let me set these up for you. Param input. This was curve spline. Okay, and when you toggle it to true, it's going to try to make a full form. Okay, so this curve can be changed depending on how many points you have. This curve can be changed by playing with the toggle, the degree. So to illustrate what that means is, if I have a degree of 1, that means that it's going to create a form that's exactly at those points.
Where did you do it? From 0 to 10?
Yeah, I just double clicked and typed in 2 to start. And then if I go to 2, it makes a curve, and it looks like it's trying to reach out to the points a little bit. But if I go to 3, it's a little bit of a softer curve. Okay, so that's how the degree function works here. Yes?
Mine are straight lines and not curved.
Your degree is either set to 1 or 0.
Okay.
So if I move my degree back to 1, it looks like that. That's what you have.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to move forward with a degree of 2 for now, because it's interesting. And then looking at it in perspective, I'll show you what I'm doing here. So let me just quickly measure the distance across my building. I've got 237 feet, which if this is going to be a high-rise building, sure, that's fine. So for me, I can go two routes. I'll show you a very simple route and then give you a new special modifier that's brand new to you guys. I think you'll really like. And then I'll show you another route. But anyway, so with this, I can move the curve itself vertically and give it a rotation, or modify it once the curve has moved. And that looks like this. So I go to Transform, Euclidean, Move. And remember, the input for move has a geometry input and a motion input, which is a vector. So where is it moving? So to set where it's moving, we go to Vector, panel of Vector, and do Unit Z, because we want it to rise vertically. Plug that into the T. And I'm going to make a slider from 0 to 1,000. And then to connect the geometry, we're going to connect the curve that we just created. So in perspective, this is what we're getting. I can move it vertically.
Oh, that's Z. Oh, gosh.
Okay, so now I have two curves that I want to create a tower out of, and it's actually remarkably simple. All you have to do is loft the two curves together. So when I go to Surface, Freeform, and then Loft, I have to input the geometry into the curves list. Okay, so I pull the G in, and then I pull the original curve in holding Shift, and it lofts those two. All right, so at this point, nothing's new, right? You guys could have done this if I had just described the assignment to you. You could have accomplished this, right? All right, good. So,
Sorry, what is that? Surface? Freeform? Okay, cool.
yeah, freeform. So now I'm going to kind of throw a curveball at you guys. I want to show you how to twist geometry, rotate it directly in Grasshopper. So we're going to create this twisted tower using exactly the same profile at the base as at the top. Okay, and that looks like this. If you go back into Transform and you look at Euclidean, there are a couple of different types of rotate. In fact, there are 4 of them. You need to know what each one of these rotates does in order to pick, the right one. So rotate an object in a plane will allow you to pick sort of a surface normal that you're rotating it around, which is kind of an easy way of doing that. That's a kind of a catch-all. Rotate will ask you for a base plane. Specifically, it'll ask you for a base plane, and then the angle, and then the geometry. And then I'm not going to pull the rest of them down, but rotate 3D will ask you for a specific vector around which to rotate, and then rotate axis will prescribe an axis for it from one point to another. Okay, so this is the one we want. We want under Euclidean, we want rotate, just plain rotate with the little plane at the bottom. And we are going to rotate the geometry that we moved to the top. So I'll pull this out because that's going to change. But this geometry gets rotated. Now look at what it's doing though. The geometry is rotating around the origin. Because the origin is where our base plane is. So if we want our geometry, our curve at the top, to rotate around itself, we simply have to find what? And where would we find its plane? Close. Under surface, analysis.
Oh, area?
Yes, under area, we can rotate it around its centroid. So we put that as the plane, and now you see that it's trying to rotate around itself. Making sense now? So there's one more component here that we need to, I'll leave it up there, that we need to modify to be able to change it, right? And so we need to create what angle we're going to rotate. And the angle is done, it's done in radians. And I don't know how much you guys recall from your math classes about converting degrees to radians. Yeah, it does suck. The good thing is that you can very simply just put a modifier on there that changes a numerical value to radians for you.
Why isn't that in math class?
Yeah, I wish. So when you go under math, and you go under polynomials, no, sorry, trig. At the very bottom of trig, there's degrees and radians. So you can take technically you could take numerical values that are measured as length, right, measured in magnitude, and you can convert them to degrees if you're working backwards, or you could take a 0 to 360 slider and you can convert it directly to radians. So when we put that down, it's going to ask for the degrees on one side, which would be a slider from 0 to 360. Plug that in, and then plug it into angle. All right, math trig, plug it into angle, and this is what happens. Now that curve will rotate to whatever angle we set it to. So here's the cool part. If I override, let me disconnect this original one. If I override the loft curve with the new rotated curve, now we can twist the tower parametrically. See that?
Can you show the vote?
Yep, sorry. See that? So you have to be careful doing this though, because if you pull it too far, it's going to turn in on itself and it'll return back to the other side. So the cool thing about Loft is that it's going to try to find the closest point to itself. So once you go beyond 180, right, it's got a pinch point right there. Once you go beyond 180, it goes back to as if you were rotating it the opposite direction. But you can't go too close to 180 with a form that folds in on itself. That would be a dangerous building.
Yeah, that's not a safe call.
Okay, so what I'd like to see is that you're at this stage by the end of tonight,
I just typed it in.
because we're going to move on from this to, how do you take this form and automatically subdivide it into floors, and then how do you get those floors to then extrude into floor plates, and then how do you automatically put structure within it. So there's a lot of things that we're going to do with this, we're also going to look at how do you take your forms that you did with massing and do the same sort of thing. Deconstruct it, reconstruct it under modified terms.
What should we call this?
I don't know what to call this. Call it something like parametric tower. Any other questions?
Wait, that's what we called the one that we created in Reddit.
That's fine. Call it parametric tower grasshopper.